Hello guys, and welcome to this Volks Wizard video. And in today's video I want to share with you my 15 years experience of buying what I think is the best value Golf GTI right now, and that's the Mk5 Golf GTI. Because if you buy a good example, you'll have one of the best driving hot hatches even today, but if you buy a bad one you'll probably very quickly regret it, and unfortunately there are plenty of bad ones out there. The good news is though, if you follow the advice in this video, there is no reason why you cannot bag yourself a great example of this hot hatch. So without any further ado, let's have a look at some buying tips for the Mk5 Golf GTI. Okay, let's get the ball rolling then with number 10. And firstly, we're going to look at Coil Springs. Now, I don't know what happened to springs since the Mk4 Golf came out, but they've been breaking regularly on cars, and it never used to happen on Mk2s or Mk3s or even Mk1s, so I'm not sure what they've changed. The roads can't have got that much worse in that time, have they? But anyway, if you do find a car's got a broken spring, it's not particularly expensive to fix if it's one of the backs, but if it's a front one, there's a lot more work involved, and you should usually do them in pairs as well, so bear that in mind. It can add up. It's definitely worth having a look under the car. Now, you probably won't have the benefit of a vehicle lift, but a fresh MOT should kind of guarantee that they're not broken. Now, this car's good. The springs are still black, which is quite unusual. Normally they're quite corroded, and this one's got the original spring for definite on this side because it's got these paint marks on it, and that's all black. Now, if you can, put your hand in the bottom and just check there isn't a bit broken off there, but just check at the top as well and make sure it's pretty much goes all the way around the top mounting there. And again, look down the bottom if you can. Now, to do those, it's relatively easy because you just disconnect the arm at the hub and you've got access to the spring. Then at the front, it is somewhat more complicated because we have the spring wrapped around the shock, which means you have to take the shock, the strut basically, off the car, and then use compressors to compress the spring and then undo the top mount. And before you even get to that point, you need to be able to undo the 3 top mount bolts, which you can probably see up there, at least one of them, maybe 2, but they're bolted in through the turret at the top. And if you can see the nuts there, they're very exposed to dirt being where they are, and there's a very good chance that when you try and undo them, they disconnect themselves from the top mount and they just spin round, which means that you have to go and angle grind off the top of the bolt head, which is a really messy, time-consuming process. But anyway, have a good look at the spring and just check it's all there. The good thing about the front ones though, they tend to make a noise when they're faulty. So on full lock you'll hear a lot of clanking and rattling, and sometimes even the bitter spring can be sitting on the wishbone, but this one's all good. Now, while we're down here, I'll just change my light because that one's gone flat at the wrong time. We're going to look at number 9, and that's the diverter valve. So basically most turbo cars have got a diverter valve because they have to manage what happens to the boost when you come off the gas. And on this car, hopefully you can see it just there with the light on it, there's a plug there, and when they fail it means the car goes very sluggish. I'll just lift the camera up, but it's just there off the turbo. There's a black thing with a 2-wire plug on it. It's not particularly easy to get to when it's not on a ramp, but easy enough on a ramp. And the problem with those is when they fail, the car goes very sluggish, and it should log a fault code, but I don't think it puts a warning light on the dashboard. They used to be around 40 to 50 quid, and there are various different versions of them because they improved them as they went along. So if you want more information, probably best to go to a forum like Mk5 Golf GTI.co.uk. Okay, at number 8 we have wear of the cam follower. So this has been reported on the internet for many, many years. It's not something from my experience that's actually that common, but there are cases that have occurred very early in the car's life where the cam follower has failed, and it's very important that it doesn't fail because it connects the camshaft to the high pressure fuel pump. It's just a little bit of metal. I think again it's probably about £30 to buy from Volkswagen, and it's actually quite easy to fit. Now what it does is it connects the camshaft with this fuel pump, because being a direct injection engine, it has to have a high pressure fuel pump, and if it wears you get damage to the camshaft, which obviously is very, very expensive. So you can periodically take off the pump, it's not too difficult at all, relieve the pressure with the Schrader valve there, take that off, take out the follower and have a good look at it, and if it's worn, you should replace it because it has a black coating. When it wears through, it goes to silver, and I think after that point it goes downhill rather rapidly. Now, you probably can't do that when you're looking at the car, but you can ask the owner if he's checked it or if he's got a receipt for a new one, because they're so cheap to replace and so expensive if they go wrong that it really is a no-brainer to change them periodically. Okay, on to point number 7 then. So the 2-litre TFSI engine is a direct injection engine, and that means that the fuel is injected directly into the cylinder, not into the inlet port or the inlet manifold, and that means that carbon can build up in the inlet port, which restricts the performance of the car. Now, thankfully, it's not very common on this engine. I've never actually seen it on a Mk5 Golf GTI or felt any effects of it anyway, but it can happen. So you really need to make sure the car's not misfiring when you're driving it, and it drives smoothly, and performance and fuel economy are where you'd expect them to be. But it's kind of hard to tell. But generally, a car that's been used regularly and had decent fuel in it and has not done too many short journeys shouldn't be affected in this particular model. I've only ever seen it once, which brings me on to point number 6. Make sure the car warms up fully and doesn't start to cool down when you're driving, because if it does, that means your thermostat is defective, and that means that you'll be running on choke for too long, which is never good for your engine, and also it means that carbon fouling is much more likely to occur. Now, thermostats used to fail on older cars back in, I know, 70s and 80s even, in a way that would mean the car would overheat, but they design them now so they don't get hot enough, and you can tell simply by looking at the temperature gauge while you're driving. After a few miles it should get to 90, which is the middle of the gauge, and it should stay there resolutely. However hard or soft you drive it, it should always stay at 90. So if it takes a long time to get there, or when it gets there it goes backwards, say you're doing a steady 60 miles an hour on a cool day, which isn't particularly stressful for the engine, the gauge can go backwards. So this car's not warmed up fully yet, but it shouldn't stay like this when you're driving. Otherwise, you need a new thermostat. The good news, the part is pretty cheap if you buy like an aftermarket one, say from Marl, but the labour is actually quite expensive because it's a module that's tucked under the inlet manifold, so it's very, very hard to get to. I reckon it's going to be at least a few hours labour, probably about a couple of £100 in most garages at least, to do that job, but it's not something you can ignore because it's very, very bad for the engine if it is left unchecked. At number 5, we have the cam belt and water pump. Now, this is due every 5 years or 80,000 miles, whichever comes soonest. It's very important to remember whichever comes soonest, because a lot of cars on the market won't have done 80,000 miles since their last cam belt change, but many of them will have done 5 or 6 years, which means the cam belt is now due. I bet you if you ask most of the owners of the cars that are for sale, they will tell you that it's not due because of the mileage, but guaranteed fact, 5 years is the maximum time regardless of the mileage, and these engines do have a history of breaking if they're not changed on time. Now, the cost is around £400 from a specialist, so if it hasn't been done in the last sort of 4 years, then it's worth allowing that from the seller. Okay, on to tip number 4, and this only applies to cars with DSG gearboxes, and to be perfectly honest, it is quite rare, but it's so high up the rankings in this list because if you do suffer it, it can be a very expensive problem to fix. Now, DSG, as I say, is generally very, very reliable, but it is a mechanical thing and it will wear out, and the more wear it has, the worse it will drive. So cars that live in London, you can imagine they're shuffling through their gearboxes much more than cars that live in, well, anywhere other than London really, but urban areas obviously will be worse than cars that live in rural areas where there's much less traffic. So you might find a car that's lived in London is a bit rough on its gearbox, and it's a bit like being with a driver who can't operate a clutch very smoothly, because basically the gearbox can't operate its 2 clutches very smoothly. So the biggest test is to make sure the car is fully warmed up, and not even just at 90, but make sure even the fans are kicking in if you can, because then the gearbox oil will be as warm as possible, and that does have a big effect on the way the car can drive. And then just select drive and simply make sure it pulls away smoothly. It shouldn't be snatching. You should be able to drive it as smoothly as you can, a manual if you're a good driver anyway. So let's try that again. Just try it a few times, but you have to make sure it's really hot. This car's not hot. So it's just simply as that. It should be able to go away without it kangarooing. It should be a nice solid takeoff. Now if that is a problem, it could be a mechatronics unit, the electronics basically that control the gearbox, or it could be the clutches, and a lot of garages really won't know which one it is until they've replaced one or the other, which could be a very expensive mistake. So probably best avoiding a car like that if you can do. But as I say, generally they're very reliable, and I've personally never heard of a DSG gearbox being replaced on this model of car. Okay, we're into the top 3 now then. So number 3 is the PCV valve. PCV stands for positive crankcase ventilation, and that's basically like the breather on an engine. There's gases that are made by the combustion process that are within the engine that need to get captured and then burnt by the engine, so they don't go into the environment because they are very polluting. And what happens is the network of hoses and valves that control that fail, and you end up with the gases going in the wrong direction, and that makes the car run very badly. This car actually suffered from that very recently, and the first symptoms were that the idle would sort of fluctuate and go higher than the sort of 850 RPM where it normally idles. There is another way of checking, which I'll show you in a bit, but let me firstly show you the valve itself. So with the engine cover off, it's very easy to see it, although it is all black like the rest of it, but it's bolted to the rocker cover, and you've got the hoses going in and the valve there. And it's very easy to replace. I think it's very cheap as well. It's probably under £40, and it's well within the DIY capabilities of most owners. Just be careful not to over tighten the screws, because they just go into plastic. Now the way to test it is really easy. We can run it without the MAF connected, although it won't run very well anyway, but it will still prove the points. So let me just start the engine. Okay, so that's running. Now when the valve fails, if you undo the oil filler cap, which normally isn't too much of a big deal to be honest when the engine's running, you won't be able to get the cap off because the vacuum in the engine will be huge. I mean, you probably need 2 hands and some pliers. That's really easy. That's a really good test of your PCV valve. If you're unsure, it's just a nice little check to do just to make sure that it's okay. You may not even notice it's defective if you don't notice the idle playing up, but your car will run a lot better with it working properly. Okay guys, tip number 2 then for buying a Mk5 Golf GTI is to make sure that the air conditioning works. Probably 1 in every 2 I buy, it doesn't work, and it can be really expensive to sort. So if it's a warm day, it's relatively easy. Turn the engine on, and then make sure the AC light is on. I can't remember now, but some might have Econ. If it does say Econ and the light is on, that means the aircon's not on, so make sure Econ is off, and then lower the temperature. Make sure you do both sides, and I'd put it just on the vents up here, and then close off the side ones, and then you've got all the air coming here. And just use your wrist, because it's quite a sensitive part of your body, and it should feel chilled, not just being blown, but actually quite cold. So even though it's 8.5 degrees today, I can really feel that that is blowing nice and cold. Turn that off. Now if it's a colder day, then it's a bit trickier. There's a bit of sun today, that's why it's warmer in here, but actually 8.5 degrees outside isn't really that cold, but you should be getting roughly probably about 2 to 3 degrees out of the vents. So if you have a look under the bonnet and find the air conditioning pipes, which are, let me just move the camera down, they're just here. If you put your hand on there, it should be really cold, much colder than the outside, so that feels like it's almost freezing, that aluminium pipe there, and that means it's working. So that's probably the best check. The only thing I need to warn you about though is if it's really cold, the aircon just doesn't work because it switches off below about, I think, 5 degrees. So yeah, you'll never be able to test it if it's below 5 degrees. But you can always plug a diagnostic computer in, and if there are any faults, they're probably going to be a low pressure fault. If it's got a problem, then there is a problem that needs fixing, and a regas probably won't work. But if the seller wants to do that, then let them have a go. Now what usually goes wrong is the air conditioning condenser. Because it's in front of the car, it can get hit by stones, and at this age they can corrode. This one you can see here is actually quite new because it's silver. But other problems can be the aircon pump losing its internal drive, which is down there, the bottom pulley underneath the alternator. And if you're lucky, you might find it could just be a seal on one of the pipes. So actually down there on the compressor, the pipes are attached with seals, and likewise onto the condenser there are seals as well. So you need a really good aircon man. I use a guy called Pete at Roadchill. He's based in Solihull, and he can come to you in the local area, and he does a vacuum test to check for leaks before he'll put any gas in, because it's actually illegal to knowingly regas an aircon system with leaks. So yeah, check the aircon. And number one in the top 10 of things to look out for when buying a Mk5 Golf GTI is to look out for rust. Now originally this only really affected the front wings, and they're relatively easy to replace. Volkswagen had a 12-year anti-corrosion warranty, but in recent years they've dropped that to 10, where they did it without quibbling. But in the years 11 and 12, it's down to your main dealer to see if they like you, because they have to pay for the repair. So if you haven't had a good relationship with your dealer, you've got no chance. I don't know how Volkswagen were able to decide they wanted to do that and to take away the last 2 years of what was a 12-year anti-corrosion warranty when the car was sold, but I've tried to push them on this with my own cars, and I've got nowhere. It's like a brick wall, and that's why I currently drive a Seat. So let me just show you a couple of examples of what to look for. So this car's got original paintwork, but it's got very early stages of corrosion on the wing. I don't know if you can see that. But at this point, I'd say it's probably best leaving that as it is, because if you were to paint the car, you'd probably find there were defects in it that wouldn't be perfect anyway. Or if you took it to Volkswagen and you were very lucky to get it done under warranty, then they'd probably only paint the wing, and you'd end up with a wing that was a different colour, which would be, I think, even worse than having a bit of corrosion there. Now you can tell how old your wing is and if it's genuine, and this is quite important really, by looking at the stamp on the inner wing there. So you can see 23rd week of 05, and that's the same on both of them. That's a little bit later, that passenger side wing. Let's have a look at this one as well. Okay, so this is the later car, and that wing is the 49th week of 07, and that one is the 49th week of 07 as well. So two original wings on that one as well. Now, other areas to look out for are the sills. This has become more of an issue in the last sort of few years for some reason, but help if I could open the door. So you get sort of any scratching on the way in becomes sort of a bit of a bubble. This car's a good example because that's just cosmetic, but on some other cars that have been scuffed when they were very early in their lives, I mean, bear in mind they're 15 years old now, the rust can take hold. And make sure you look at the back as well. So this is, yeah, pretty much perfect. Another area is the rear wheel arch. I'm not really sure why some cars are affected more than others, but if you fit bigger wheels, you'll end up with the stones hitting the wheel arch lip and taking the paint away, and then salt and that will get in there and cause corrosion. So that could be a reason, or if a car's been lowered and it's rubbed on that, it will cause corrosion. You might not know because it might have been put back onto its standard suspension, so check that. Also here, this particular area, driver's side, seems to be a hot spot for corrosion. It's almost like the bumper rubs the quarter panel and causes it to rust. So, well, that's it then. 10 top tips for buying a Mk5 Golf GTI. The most important thing though is to get somebody to go and look at it with you, because you do need an expert for some of these things, but they are generally a great car and you can tell a lot by the history and the owner. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this Volkswizard video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, please comment, please share, please do subscribe and click that bell notification icon, and I'll see you for the next one really soon. Stay safe guys.